Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Philosophy of Art and Science. As always, you can support this program directly on YouTube or on aksum.substack.com or patreon.com/aksum. Today's special guest is Dr. Richard Hanania. Welcome back to the program. Or I should say for the first time, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Hanania. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. I have a few different podcasts that I do, but people find that I'm interested in languages, and we were casually discussing names before we hopped on. I'm actually interested. Is your last name, is it like a family name, or is it the name of your father, or like a particular recent ancestor?
No, it's a surname. Yeah, it's a surname. I know some Arabs. I think it's some of them did not have surnames. But no, in the region where I'm from in the Levant, I think they've had surnames for a long time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. In the Horn of Africa, we do have some old Levantine connections, but our tradition is more you don't have surnames, and then it's kind of the biblical way. You're named after your father, so like your father begat you, and so on. But I've met some people who have like Abu something, which is like they're the father of so and so.
Well, my mother's name is her maiden name was Abu Daya.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's like the father of so and so.
According to them, there was an ancestor who's some Muslim guy wanted to marry him, and then his daughter, and then he wouldn't, and he cut off his hand, and so he became the father of the hand. I don't know, but this is their story. Apparently.
It's an amazing. We used to have that in our indigenous form of governance before the 20th century got some American and British hand wringing for us to get some civilized constitutions where we don't chop off people's hands anymore.
Yeah.
But that actually brings me to a good segue. We met at your recent debate in Los Angeles, Glendale, for those who actually know, on monarchy versus democracy. I'm wondering in general, first, is debating something that you do? I hadn't seen any like other official debates. Is that something that you normally do?
That was, I think, my first debate. I've done public appearances, but a debate, yeah, that was the first one ever.
What did you think of it? What was I don't know if it was what you expected or not.
It was fine. I mean, I was really, I was pretty sick that day, so I was a little bit not my full self. I sort of am a little bit hard on myself. I wish I would have pushed Curtis on a few opportunities that I had. But it was, I mean, it's fun to get out there. I met you, I met other people. I think, I made my arguments. It's a, I don't think debates change people's minds. I don't know. Like, I think your mind should be made up. Whatever somebody says, like within an hour in a conversation, it's something, but it shouldn't really be making your mind on a big question like this. You should read a lot and think a lot. And so, yeah, it's more for the entertainment value and sort of bringing people out and having fun. So, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think those things were met for what it's worth on the audience, and I didn't see any sort of fatigue or lacklusterness. But you know yourself better than anyone else would. I went into it. I'm always kind of a contextual guy, so I would say I went into it already a monarchist, and part of that is just thoughts on order that changed throughout the pandemic. Which Curtis played a part in. But I grew up where my parents grew up in an Orthodox Christian monarchy, and they came here right before the rise of communism in Ethiopia, and so their kind of default position was that. I think a lot of people don't have any experience. It's a very foreign idea, and I would say, at least from the perspective of someone who was kind of already biased against your side, but open to it, I think, in the American context, because that is what's, I think, contextually appropriate here. But I think that could change depending on where in the world you are. I thought you did a really good job basically arguing for the status quo. But with your background in political science, I do wonder about what you think about certain because I think the first thing you did really well is you didn't caricature democracy, right? Could you talk about like the difference between quote unquote pure democracy and what it is that you were actually arguing for?
Yeah, I mean, historical context is important. You're right. I mean, and of course, I'm not an absolutist on government or these issues. I don't think anyone really should be. The uh, democracy is nobody is actually believes, well, I mean, nobody's smart, or nobody really, even like a lot of political scientists, maybe they're not the biggest geniuses, but even they, anyone who studies politics a little bit, does not believe in like the Santa Claus story of democracy. I mean, political scientists all know that the voters are uninformed. They're picking their candidates or choosing their policy positions on superficial or kind of superficial criteria, or not really thinking about things, either easily influenced. Everyone knows that, and they know also that they don't necessarily get their way on a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues where public opinion and policy diverge, right? So anyone who studies politics to any extent, even someone who reads the newspaper, should know that. And so, what is democracy? Democracy, I think, is a kind of machine for incorporating different aspects of public opinion, but also mechanisms and institutions for getting at truth, and also limiting the power of one another. So this is Madison. This is the checks and balances. American founders did not think that the people were wise or anything like that. They set up a system where the people were foolish, and because it's not like you can ever get rid of people and what they want. In dictatorial regimes, they'll take to the streets, they'll riot, or they'll demand something from a dictator, or one not going along with them, or resisting them. So you can't get rid of public opinion, and you can't get rid of sort of mass sentiment. And the question is, what do you do with it? And historically, democratic systems with regular elections, with free press, with institutions, what U.S. and Western Europe do. I mean, it's not like a Platonic definition that is perfectly consistent in every way. But basically, the system that we have is superior to others. I think people had a basis for once thinking otherwise. Maybe 10 years ago, when China was growing rapidly and looked like it was going to own the future, when Russia was doing better than it's doing today, people could look at that and say, okay, maybe you don't need necessarily democracy. But I think just the lesson of history here is that the other ways of organizing society, we haven't found one yet. And whether we will or not, I don't know. But that's it's still to be determined if there's anything that could replace democracy. There's nothing out really on the horizon.
Yeah, I really like that point. It's brilliant the way in which the founders didn't try to wave away with a wand these forces, but they addressed these forces and had them check and balance each other. And in these historical examples, you kind of see them lopsided in different ways. I do think you're being a bit optimistic about what people will say and stand for. And there's always this argument of, is it ignorance or malevolence about what they're doing? But I have heard, and I have a good friend who's, for example, a political science PhD, like you, a professor actually in academia right now, and several others that I've heard. And I don't know if it's just their side losing in that particular category, but you see them, for example, having questions about the role of SCOTUS, like whether these judges should be there for lifetime appointments or not, and what is the right, number of them being there, or should they be elected rather than appointed? And you even hear that in talks almost every election where it goes sour to them about the Electoral College. Like, what do you make of people critiquing that from the point of view that they want to increase the power of that democratic force?
There's a lot there. I mean, the question of how you pick judges, it varies by country to country. And so in Poland, the judges for a while were just picked by other judges. So it would be like a closed system. And then when the last government tried to change that, a lot of people said that's undemocratic. Well, in the U.S. system, the president picks the judges and the Senate confirms, but that's not considered undemocratic. So a lot of these kind of ideas of what's democracy or not, it comes down to people. People not liking the results or liking the results. The Electoral College, you can make arguments about different kinds of system for judges. The Electoral College is an interesting one because I don't think there is like a neutral justification for it. It is like Republicans like it because they think it advantages them. But there's no like actual reason. Like, you might want judges elected or you might want judges appointed somehow. But like, why the people in one state should have more of a voice than people in another state, that's just historical accident. And I'm not like so upset, oh my God, we have to go change it. I get why Democrats and liberals can be upset about that. I mean, their anger makes sense. But I think just like quibbling over these things, they're part of our tradition. They're a part of our history. So it's not necessarily worth changing. But yeah, I mean, there's a point there. It's unquestionably undemocratic.
Yeah, it is. It is, and that's why it's interesting to see, if people could stick to it in terms of principle. You've had very few people like Justin Amash, who was unceremoniously uh, taken out via vote, right? And others, maybe Thomas Massey and a few others, maybe Rand Paul sometimes, who have taken certain stands of principle where they end up either on the left or the right of a certain position because they want to stand on the principle, whereas you see kind of most congressmen and women and senators who are just doing the thing that helps their team win in that particular cycle. I guess there's one of these institutions that I've found fascinating. The more conspirial type minds point to a number of changes that happened, particularly in 1913, including the income tax, the creation of the Federal Reserve. The third one that I find interesting that the historian Thomas Woods always points to is the changing. I think it's the 17th Amendment of the senators. Senators used to be selected by the state legislatures versus a kind of direct vote of the people. I'm wondering if you've ever had a strong opinion either way there in that democratic mechanism.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what Tom's theory is as to why these things all happened around the same time. Um, as far as picking senators from the state, I tend to think the direct method is the 17th Amendment method. I tend to think that's probably better. The states are special interests. I mean, I think it's you get too divorced sort of from what the people want if you're going to a state legislature, and then the state legislature. On the other hand, I don't know. I mean, like all these things depend. I mean, a lot of the senators today are blowhards, and maybe they would be more serious people if there was sort of this other layer between the people and the Senate. I mean, the senators do represent a broader section of the population. I think I'm on average, more impressed with them than members of Congress. But yeah, with this having the states select them be even better. But I mean, potentially it would also be, you could imagine sort of just special interests really capturing them. They would be very sort of not independent. That could be good. That could be bad. It really just depends.
Yeah, I think Woods's argument is more of the effect that it's less a kind of Bilderberg or worshiping in the wilderness an owl type cabal, and more of a general kind of factor of the progressive movement, which people point to nowadays often is the whatever deep state or administrative state, but just getting. It's weird though because it is a democratic function, and a lot of the other ones are creating them as unelected positions. But I think that's where he kind of paints it, or the broad strokes he paints it within. I wonder also what you think of. I think there were some other figures brought up that night during the debate, which bend the genres. Like Curtis emphasizes a lot the kind of history of George Washington, and a nascent democracy might be different than one that's well established, and then looks at figures like Lincoln and FDR, who seem to have bent the rules quite a bit, but they still were within the system. And I think Lee Kuan Yew and Paul Kagame were of Singapore and of Rwanda were also kind of mentioned. Kagame's always interesting to me because people seem to always want to intervene in Africa in particular, especially after the genocide we would have grown up with in the 90s. And I know that's a UN term that people argue about all the time, so we could use a different term. But whatever happened between the Tutsis and the Hutus, it seems interesting that no one's really ever intervened on him, although I've seen some journos antagonize him from time to time, and I always like his quips. So I wonder what you think of either Washington, Lincoln, FDR, Lee Kuan Yew, and Paul Kagame, because they all seem to have a bending of the rules. And we don't know what's going to happen after Kagame, but the others, the system kind of does go back to normal after them. in the American cases.
Yeah, well, I mean, Washington was a case where he was setting the template. People weren't really sure what the president was going to do, and I think I think the most important thing he did, and this is the acknowledged story, is that he stepped down after 2 terms. That became the norm, and everyone followed that until
Voluntarily, yeah.
Roosevelt. Lincoln. I mean, it's hard. It's you have it's very I mean, it's very interesting. It worked out in the end. I think a lot of people died. Obviously, slavery was ended. Um, uh, I feel I have very sort of mixed feelings, about that, because the war was, the war. It happened. You didn't know that it was going to actually work out. You could have killed all these people, and you could have
For
not ended
nothing.
slavery and not preserved the Union. I don't. I mean, I think slavery would have been on its way out eventually. Maybe it would have taken a very long time, but I don't think the South could have maintained it forever. I think just the rest of the world was moving beyond it, and the North would have. Moved beyond the South economically. It was just the future was going to be industrialization rather than plantation slavery. But I think you can't argue with the results in the
And
end.
things like him suspending habeas corpus and stuff like that,
Yeah, I
sort
mean
of emergency powers.
yeah, I mean, for a civil war, I mean, you can forgive that. I think that we do this. I mean, everyone does this. It's natural. It makes sense. The Yeah, and I think after you get to Lincoln, I think the presidents who seize power, I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a huge fan of Wilson or Roosevelt.
Hmm.
Johnson, who might not have gone beyond his power, but who passed a lot of legislation, who signed a lot of legislation. So yeah, I think that when they go beyond, emergency is one thing. I think that when American leaders have tended to go beyond that, it's been to expand the size of the federal government. And I think the size and the power of the federal government, maybe in Washington's day, it needed to be stronger. I think today it probably does too much. It needs to do less. So yeah, again, very historically sort of context dependent. Sometimes you need the strongman. Sometimes you need a sort of caretaker who backs off.
Yeah, it's been impressive, right? I think I have to verify it, so I don't know if it's accurate, but I've been reading that Milei, with everything, all the prices jumping up in Argentina, finally balanced the budget, and it took him like a little bit under 10 weeks to do. So his
Yeah, I
context
mean, I
kind of,
just started cutting things. Yeah, we'll see how that works out. I mean, it's a very interesting case. And in that case, you need. I mean, Argentina's a basket case. The government has been so bad for so long. Literally, one of the two or three worst governments in the world over the last 50 to 100 years. That it's good to try something new in that case.
yeah, and you all, I think during the debate you also talked about Bukele. So while we're in the international mind, I wonder. I think you said you were something like hesitantly hopeful, right? But you're not a fanboy yet.
I'm pretty close to a fanboy. I mean, he's done for the last couple of years. I mean, he's done what I think somebody should do. He's extended his time in office, so he's doing sort of the anti George Washington thing.
Hmm.
I hope eventually it can't just be dependent on one man, because that's just not the way. That's not a good system. He needs to find a way to take these changes. He taught El Salvador how you deal with crime, that you have to be tough on it. I think he's got a very high approval rating. He's got 80 or 90% approval rating or something. The important thing to do at this point is to institutionalize that, create strong institutions, strong police force that doesn't depend on one man, and then eventually, hopefully, eventually leave office. I don't, it's hard to know from his perspective whether that's possible. Maybe it does depend on him, and maybe whoever comes next will be too weak. But yeah, I mean, eventually, like you can give him a little bit of a, It's only because he's been in office for that long. You can give him a little bit of leeway here. But if he's still in 20 years, he's still ruling El Salvador. That's not going to be a good outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I always want to have a mediating or neutral type of vibe. So when I was seeing you guys debate, in my head, I was like, oh man, maybe they'll both compromise and then the thing would be removing term limits. But it sounds like you are not interested in that unless it's a particular case that seems to uh, dictate it. But if someone kept winning democratically, you still think there is something uncouth going on there, like as
Well, I
opposed
mean,
to just holding power.
it's yeah. I mean, maybe you're right. No, maybe I guess. Well, he changed. I mean, he changed the rule, and that's sort of a problem when you do that. Yeah, if he wins democratically forever, is that necessarily a problem? Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not in that case. Now that he's changed the rule, um, yeah. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I think it it is, and it depends upon that force. But yeah, like you said, the founders didn't find the people to be wise, so we'll see how long they get it. But he is sort of, I think, running under the assumption that the people are wise and trying to maintain that energy. But the mob, which Mencken used to always write about, may turn against him. I think I've heard you describe yourself, so correct me if I'm wrong, as libertarian leaning or dispositionally so in some ways. And I've heard some, especially like reason beltway libertarians, when speaking about the idea that they've been arguing against since decades, basically since Nixon and everybody, that the war on drugs has been like a total failure. And even I remember reading a paper from Glenn Greenwald many moons ago, I think it was 2001, about the study in Portugal. I think Portugal still has decriminalized, where you see the most ancient kind of writing from the 90s about Wired magazine about Singapore, is that they describe it as Disneyland plus the death penalty, where you can get, clubbed for chewing gum on the street. And the question that some of the Beltway libertarians have is, yeah, you could solve kind of crime this way, but is it worth it? Would you want to kind of live in that society? I wonder what you think of the issue. Are you a full drug decrim type of guy, or I don't know how? What do you think
Yes.
of
I
that
mean, I
question in
just,
terms of
yeah,
crime
I mean,
versus violent
yeah,
crime?
yeah. I mean, look, I think that you should legalize all drugs and you should come down very, very hard on crimes with victims. I don't know if it's the drug war that makes Singapore, you can just, the Singapore's population is sort of very selected. It's 70% Chinese. I mean, Chinese have very low crime rates, very low rates of dysfunction everywhere. Um, and so, I mean, there could be a benefit for there could be a benefit for eradicating drugs. I just don't want a society where government tells people what to put in their bodies. The
Yeah,
problems that drugs cause, where people are on the street and they're dependent or they're violent or whatever, you can deal with that directly. I really am a big believer in dealing with an issue directly rather than indirectly dealing with it, restricting people's rights because because it indirectly gets at the thing that you want to deal with. So some people complain about immigration. Oh, they depend on the welfare state, or some people will commit crimes. And I'm just like, okay, don't have a welfare state, don't have crimes. You could do that for everything. You can restrict everyone's freedom. You could say, we can't have ice cream because people are going to get fat, and then
yeah.
the government is going to have to pay for their health care. And as long, we can't have ice cream, we can legalize ice cream, but only when we have no government health care. And just you'll never have any freedom in that case, right? Because you'll always be able to just justify attacking freedom as something that can cost something down the line. And so, like when the other thing happens, like deal with the thing that you directly care about. I mean, and people aren't smart enough, or it's not just the rights. It's not just about individual rights. It's that usually you're not smart enough to foresee the consequences of your actions. So you can have the drug war, and it could work in Singapore, but it could be like the U.S. where it doesn't actually work very well, and that's often the case. And like, so what are you doing? You have some indirect theory about how you're making the world better, and the theory may not even be true. And so this is I have a deep problem with these sort of it's a sort of a epistemological point. It's like we know nothing. We really know nothing. We just have to deal with direct issues. We can't deal with things indirectly. We don't know nearly enough.
I like that direct approach. It reminds me when you were talking of several years ago, I think New York City had some inane rule about you can't have a 24-ounce soda, but you could have like a 16-ounce soda. And then more
Mhm.
recently, I've seen even some splits of arguments in the right about whether or not to outright ban, for example, like Europe, GMOs. And Nassim Taleb has claimed victory for a lot of, the downward spiral of things like Monsanto and whatever the dummy corporation that replaced it is. And then other people arguing about getting rid of the artificial meat, or at least not allowing like things like that to call itself meat, or not, or making a law that doesn't allow things that aren't milk to call themselves, this is that milk. And so I see you are having the direct approach, and that would be a kind of principled stance and all of these things. I don't know if you had different thoughts on the burgeoning fake meat debates and how to label it.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, it's you can label words as you want to label them, right? This is not something for government to be doing. I think this is protectionism. This is a kind of this is the agriculture lobby wants to stop any kind of sort of technological progress in this area. They see it as competition. I think that the factory farms are a tragedy. If we get lab grown meat, it'll be a great day for human civilization. I've been very disturbed to see it getting, it's not ready yet, so it doesn't matter now, but maybe it'll matter. I saw Alabama, the Senate, I saw Florida, they're taking steps. I don't know if either state has actually done it. I know they did it in Italy, and
Mm-hmm.
Italy just has all the worst sort of Luddite sort of stupid populist ideas are really all being put into effect there. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of technological progress. I'm a big person who's very concerned about animal rights, and I think there's a way that technology can help us deal with these humanitarian issues. Maybe not humanitarian; that's the wrong word for it. These broad sort of ethical issues that we should be worried about.
Yeah, no, it works if you personify the animals. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I got what you're trying to say. Um, yeah, I appreciate the way you're thinking on this, and in looking in your academic background, you have, is that right? Both JD and a PhD.
Yeah, it's too much. It's embarrassing. It's too much schooling, but yes, I do.
I'm curious. I went to law school, but I didn't get a JD. I got a dispute resolution master's instead. If you're familiar, just the ADR type
How does that
area
work?
of the field. So arbitration, mediation, negotiation, ombudsing. If you know the ombudsman, certain hospitals and universities have them as well. Kind of
So
an
you can
off
work
the
in like
record inform.
you can work in like these arbitration hearings.
Exactly, exactly. Although the kind of like the closed circuit that you mentioned in Poland earlier, a lot of times the lawyers and judges prefer you have the squire by your name if you're going to be
Mhm.
doing that. But yeah, I've done a number of cases on my own. I worked throughout Los Angeles in the downtown court, Downey, Van Nuys, Inglewood, and then worked for a couple universities out of state and in state. But
Which university did you go to?
I
Or
was
law
at,
school?
I worked, oh, the law school is Pepperdine in
Okay,
Malibu.
and so you leave? Man, Pepperdine, what a location! I drove
Yeah,
by Pepperdine to go to the beach. My God, that must have been amazing.
it
Uh,
was.
the when you and so you left. You always planned to do this terminal master's degree, or did you just
I didn't.
decide?
So I worked for Congressman Dennis Kucinich in my senior
Yeah.
year of college. From
Uh,
there, I got his rec and was doing AmeriCorps work in education in Watts. And I was a kind of para educator there, but not the one that gets coffee, like the one that just intervenes for the lowest scoring math and English students. So my passion was education, and I come from some teachers, my mother, and both her parents, and even one of my dad's sisters. And from there, I saw that the behavior was a huge issue. So I studied dispute resolution in education, first going for a certificate, but my counselor convinced me to get the terminal master's degree, which I
mhm.
wasn't originally looking for, but he's like, it looks better than the certificate. Then I worked in throughout the field, but just was disgusted by the politics aspect of it, where I kind of thrived in the case management, the actual doing of the mediations and the works. And when some of that wasn't panning out the way I liked it, I jumped back into education. So now I'm actually substitute teaching, but I've taught at different Episcopal and Catholic schools. And actually, I'm contracted to teach at another Catholic school next year.
Oh, fun. Yeah, I was a substitute teacher. I had a year after college. I wasn't doing anything, and my mom worked in the public school, and so yeah, I did substitute. They would call me, I don't know, like every 2 weeks or something, and I would go and just sub for classes.
It's a very unique experience. I've got the book here somewhere, but let me see here. Nicholas Baker, if you know him, he's more famous for his book Up in Smoke, which
Yeah,
is
I read
about
that
World
one.
War II.
Yeah.
But he's got a book on his experience as substitute teaching as well, which he did just so that he could write the book. Very interesting
Interesting.
guy. I
Yeah.
the Hamilton music writer Lin-Manuel Miranda also was a substitute teacher. A lot
Hmm.
of, I think, interesting archetypes are drawn to the field. But I guess what I would love to ask you, because I do think some people are either in grad school or considering it, what was the kind of thought process behind it, getting like both a JD and a PhD, which are different terminal degrees? And would you ever advise anyone to do likewise? Or what would you tell people who are even thinking about either law school or getting a
It,
PhD?
it depends on what you want to do with your life. I would, law school, here's, I mean, I have to go back sort of the decision at every point. So law school, I went there because I didn't really know what to do. You shouldn't be like me because I waited very late to just sort of get my self on track and know what I was doing. So I just graduated from college. I didn't have any skills. Like I didn't go to a good school. I went to an okay state school. And I just sort of didn't know what I was going to do with my life. But then I went to law school just because you can get into a good law school without, like, you couldn't go to a good graduate school with like just a test score. You have to have something else. So law
Interesting.
school was the only thing I could do and like go to a good school. I wanted to go to a good school. I wanted to go to a school that could like reflect my intelligence, just to just to have that sort of credential. And so I went to law school, and then I realized I don't want to be a lawyer. Um, and then I said, okay, I'll go get a PhD in political science. I like politics. I like international affairs. And they're like, I don't like this either. This is stupid. I hate, academia, and I hate everyone in academia. And so then I started doing this, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like, yeah, don't follow my advice. I wasted a lot of time. You can go to law school if you think you'd like being a lawyer, and you can go to a good law school because where you go to law school actually matters a lot. So going to a top 5, top 10 law school. If you just want to be a lawyer, you can go to a lower ranked law school too. You can be a lawyer, but it's gonna, it's limit. You're not going to go work for a big firm. You I don't know. You might be able to go into public interest or something like that. But yeah, the rank of the law school matters a lot. Graduate school, I would just like in something like political science, it doesn't make any sense, I think, for just about anyone. There's more interesting work you could do on think tanks. Some people can even make it on their own, like being a Substack or being a writer. I think that like the even if you just like studying things, like political science is not the best way to get at truth. They make you focus on very narrow. It costs a lot of time. I mean, it takes 5 years or so to
Hmm.
get your PhD at least. So some people take a lot longer. The job prospects are not good. So a PhD in the social sciences, I just think, is a terrible idea. I can't imagine any circumstance where anyone should do it. Like it's really hard for like if you all you want to be is a political science professor, like why? Like why would that be your goal in life? Anything you want to do, you could do it like cheaper and more directly and with better financial options some other way. You want to be a thinker, you can go work at a think tank. You can try to write on your own. You could be a journalist. You can do excellent work as a journalist. That's hard to make it into too, but it's more interesting and it's faster and it's doesn't take as much time and just wasting your life away as going into academia is. So I don't know about STEM. I don't know if you're going to do math or physics or something like that. Just what I know, the social sciences, terrible idea to get a PhD.
I love that because it's cool to see things done differently or from what you do them, and you know better in 2020 hindsight vision. But now a couple of things that you said stuck out to me. One of them is in regards to whether or not to use STEM or humanities. I've seen people in the social science and political science go both ways. That was my undergraduate study, so I was always paying attention to it. Did you do and try to incorporate more math stuff, or were you more on the theory end when you were studying?
No, I mean, one good thing about academia with KPG is we learn some basic statistics. And so if you want to understand the world, like I said, maybe you can be a think tank, or you can be a journalist, or you can write on your own or whatever. I think even to be an educated person, I think learning basic statistics is very important. And you'll get that from grad school, but there's online classes now.
Hmm.
You can teach yourself. So just learning like basic couple, you don't have to learn that much. I mean, it's diminishing returns to learn the most complicated statistics. Doesn't give you much more than learning simple regression and hypothesis testing. I mean, just getting that, I think, will make you sort of sophisticated. I had an article people should read called Epistemology in the World of Fake Data, which is just published a few weeks ago. Yeah, people should check that out. Just like thinking about causality, how to prove things, thinking about epistemology, getting that, I think, is just valuable for understanding the world, and just probably for life too.
Yeah, that was a kind of funny stasis in the debate between you and Curtis. That was kind of, I'm sure you were frustrated by it because the audience would have been too, but it was a funny moment where you were wanting to use, okay, if you don't want to use GDP, let's point to another statistic. Let's use something that could
Yeah,
be found in some database somewhere. And he was going a little bit more off of vibes for certain
yeah.
things about the health and status of the people. But
Mhm.
I appreciate at least that you both got to that point where you were just dealing with different premises, and so there was no way you were going to conclude in the same way when trying
Yeah,
to judge
I
the
don't know.
health of
Yeah,
the
it's
people.
sort of a side. Yeah, it's sort of a side. Because what's he debating? What are we debating? I mean, he wasn't debating. He wasn't comparing to non-democratic states. I mean, it's sort of silly because debate, sometimes you go on these side tangents that actually, if you step back and you think about it, wait a minute, that didn't make a lot of sense, because we said the U.S. is doing well, but like he's probably thinking of like Europe, where people are not as fat, but those are also democracies. So like, yeah, what's the point?
Yeah, I think the only proper monarchies to compare them would be like UAE and Saudi.
Yeah, unless people are
Uh,
fatter than anyone. Yeah,
but yeah, our distant cousins over there, for me
yeah,
across the Red
yeah.
Sea,
They
for
have
you in
very
the
high
southeast.
obesity rates. I mean, very, very high.
They're living life. But yeah, you mentioned also that people could just be a thinker or a journalist. I wonder, do you think of yourself as a sort of rogue academic, or an academic who's just not, institutionalized right now, or working for an institution? Rather, he is an institution unto in himself. Or do you view yourself as like a journalist? Like, are you using those skills that you got from grad school for your writing? Because obviously you're a writer and a podcaster. Or do you see yourself as a kind of different type of journalist who's just because you've been published by WAPO and other major
Yeah.
places as well,
I'm not a
prestige presses.
journalist. I mean, I don't really report original news stories. I don't go talk to sources and break news. Yeah, I mean, I'm just a writer. I mean, I don't know. I'm a content creator. I don't know. I don't know. I don't feel the need to like put labels on it, man. I don't feel the need to do that. I write essays. I'm on Twitter. People can read it and take what they want from it.
That's no, that's good. That's fair. And I know from just picking your brain a little bit that you're also kind of it was mentioned during the debate that all of you, including Anna, who was the host from Red Scare, who hosted your debate, all of you are parents, and so people always have to think about how are they going to educate their kids, and there are all these arguments about, especially with 50 to 80% of things being genetics or nature, environment, how much does it even matter? I wonder if you have thoughts on like public schooling or different forms of private school or even homeschooling.
Yeah. So I mean, the genetics is obviously hugely important for how smart people are, and other traits. Um, for like, getting into different stuff, I think that you could potentially shape the environment of a child. And so like I had no like some people I knew grew up coding. I had no computer science courses in my suburban Chicago school. I had nobody in my life who was like a coder or into software. So, obviously I didn't get into it when I was a kid. And so, yeah, I think exposing kids to different stuff is good. And the behavioral genetics research shows that like in the typical range of parenting, it really doesn't matter much. But the caveat, and I talked to Brian Kaplan about this, who wrote a book on this stuff, but he agreed with me, was that if you're an unusual human being, it's not gonna be captured in the study. So like
Mhm.
I write things, and people are often inspired by them, and they tell me that they change the way they view the world. And so it'd be very strange if I couldn't have that impact on my children, if living with them and just giving them my essays to read, like it was impossible for me to change their mind or anything. That would be very, very weird. But most people cannot change anyone's mind, right? Or
Yeah.
anyone. So like maybe like a typical parent doesn't, it's going to be harder for them to influence them. So yeah, I like to think that if you're you see yourself as some kind of unusual, it doesn't mean like you have to be a genius or something, but like somebody who's learned something smart about life, has gained some wisdom over the years, and you could pass that along, and you could sort of see, you could see your children and sort of how they're growing up, and you could see the similarities and the struggles that they face. I tend to think that that can have a big influence. The as far as like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of public schooling. I'm not a big fan of structure. I dropped out of high school. I wasn't a good student. I couldn't deal with it at all. I couldn't deal with it like a real education. But then I kept going to graduate school and getting more degrees, paradoxically. But
Yeah.
it's not the same. You can sort of work on your own and do your own thing. I'm in graduate school, so yeah, I mean, I think that it depends. I mean, people are, yeah, not everyone's going to be like me, but I think there's got to be, it's just like you don't have to do what everyone else does. You could sort of think about like ways to, I think getting into something that's potentially lucrative, I think is also a good idea for kids.
Yeah, the the program that I'll be getting into offers particularly low income students an opportunity to work at different tech companies like 1 day a week, and then you have extended day of school. And there are a number of charter schools that, like Thomas Sowell and others, have written about. The Superman documentary from years ago in education has highlighted as well that kind of extended days work for some people. But for some people, uh, being at home and working more individualized, more personalized, tailor-made things are allow them to have their creativity or their moments of genius that otherwise would have been snuffed out. When speaking about what kind of impact and influence these things could have, I read an article of yours on your Substack that I really appreciated, and we'll plug it properly at the end, coming up soon. But it was about how the Substackification, or having too much tailor-made stuff, can influence you in a certain way. And I think maybe your recent critiques of Tucker Carlson kind of point to something of like that. What could happen to you? What sort of conspiratorial mindset? Now, whether he believes some of these things or not, it's between him and God. But this idea that you have about trusting the record of the prestige papers of record, the so-called papers of record, whether it's New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, whatever it may be, the kind of the major entities, as opposed to just the things that are totally, just individuals by themselves. Could you talk a little bit about that argument?
Yeah, I mean, people are not very good at most of the time. If you go out there and you try to do your own research or figure things out for yourself, you're going to do like a worse job than institutions, like most of the time. Like the New York Times says is more likely to be accurate than what some average person who just looked into something for a few minutes believes. And I think that we've seen problems with the mainstream media unquestionably, but we've also had this reaction where sort of people who don't know what they're talking about start to develop very strong opinions on things, and they're just often very, very wrong. And most of the time, the institutions are going to beat the individual, and the institutions have problems. But it's important to remember that. I mean, if you say Alex Jones has some good points, I mean, I'm sorry, you've lost your mind. I'm sorry. He's funny, he's entertaining, but he's a crazy person, and you
Are you
shouldn't be
saying the
listening to him.
frogs were not turned gay?
They might have been. I mean, that might have been the least crazy thing he said. But yeah, I mean, people just sort of have to be able to maintain perspective. And I think that I was more 3 or 4 years ago, maybe more like, oh well, whatever. Like the establishment is so bad that anything and nothing can be worse. But then I see sort of conspiracy theories really take hold on the right in particular. And I'm just like, oh no, they've overcorrected. They've gone way too far in the other direction.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about you is that you have and you've written about views that you've changed according to evidence that you have seen, which is a real kind of sign of maturity and ability to think differently, rather than how other people perceive it in a kind of negative way. They want you to be unchanging forever, but that doesn't show that you are kind of open in any sense at all. But then there's a negative side to these prestige presses or these so-called mainstream media. They do get some things like just very, very wrong, right? Like Trump derangement syndrome or TDS is a very real thing. And many moons ago, I did read your WAPO piece. It was very fascinating about how you said in that moment, I think it was 2015, that he shouldn't apologize, and that his sort of lack of an apology, which by the way is another thing that Taleb always argues, is what that disagreeableness, which I think Gladwell has written, Malcolm Gladwell has written about as well, that kind of trait, disagreeability, is something that draws people to you.
Yeah.
So, like, you're such a believer in the founders' checks and balances. What do you think then is a good check and balance on these major organizations that do get most things wrong, but if you're only reading them, you will kind of miss some things?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty good job of, I mean, the people are critiquing them all the time. And I think Twitter has done an excellent job of this. I mean, I think that, I think it's maybe, I don't know, it's hard to tell, but I think it's getting less dumb than it used to be. I'm seeing a lot less really stupid stuff on, like, the racism is everywhere. I just see slightly less of that in the last few years, and that might be Elon Musk buying Twitter. So maybe the mainstream media being what it is, and then Twitter being free. Maybe that's the best combination. It's not like we're going to ever find, like, oh, here's the perfect institution, like New York Times or like InfoWars or like Twitter or something like that. It's not going to be like one thing. It's going to be, and the ideally we'll have some kind of interplay that leads us to something logical.
Yeah, and it's been very interesting. I have some very left of center friends who have seen things like the New York Times and the New Yorker, who themselves have been course correcting. And I think anyone who objectively looks at them, and whether it's their union battles or the way they're trying to discuss the trans issue in a different way, they seem to be, not right of center, but heading towards some type of course correction. I think even CNN has been attempting to do something like that. And so one of the kind of major issues which you have kind of family roots for, and I think that you've had fascinating takes on, is this big war. Even like, do you say Israel versus Palestine, or do you say Israel versus Hamas? And the million interviews Pierce Morgan has had between, YouTubers and PhDs and so many other people have been fascinating. And I've tried to gather as much information on it as possible. Our mutual friend Razib, I think, ran your DNA and that of many Palestinian of Christian background, and found you guys are we was ancient Jews.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wonder what you think of how kind of the media have been covering it, and with your kind of special connection to the Holy Land, what your thoughts on everything going on have been.
Yeah, so I think that the media, the amount of attention they give to Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very interesting. There was an article that was making the rounds. I think it was from 2014 or so, in Commentary. It was like by a former AP reporter, but it was making the rounds on, or was it Tablet? I think it was Tablet. I was making the rounds on Twitter just in the last year or so, and it was just talking about how basically, like, the AP would have more journalists working on Israel than like all of India and like Africa
Wow.
put together. I mean, it was just something ridiculous, right? I mean, this is just sort of the obsession with this issue. And it used to be sort of a lot of Jewish people in the media. People thought that, oh, they're just pro-Israel, but it's not actually. Some of that is there. Some individuals might be like that, but it's actually more like the Palestinians have become a kind of like a sort of an official minority that like the international community has deep investment. It's become sort of trendy, like to care about the
Hmm.
Palestinians more than any other people. The UN relief workers agency, the refugee agency, they are they basically run the education system and health system in Gaza. They employ a lot of people. Just there's just a lot of interest in this conflict. So is it like, I mean, I think that the media coverage has been, it's been, I think, I don't think I haven't noticed it's been particularly good or particularly bad. It gives you all the facts because it's so saturated. It covers so much about Israel Palestine, um, that it's it's giving you like the facts in real time. It's just the question of how much you should be covering, for example. Compared to everything else in the world, I think Israel would probably wish it gets less attention, because the more
Hmm.
attention you give it, the more attention you're giving to, the people are dying every day, but like the victories aren't coming every day, and so it's just bad for them the more it's on the news. So in the sense that like they're over covering the deaths of the civilians relative to every other conflict in the world. From that perspective, you can say it's biased. But it's not like lying or anything particularly bad. It's just the fact that the world is really obsessed with this conflict.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Ukraine Russia stuff gets information as well, but just because I'm like totally focused in on the Horn, I see that stuff, and just looking at total death counts, 600,000 allegedly in the Horn of Africa and the civil war in Ethiopia. But to your point, coverage in it is covered, but far less so than what's going on in Israel and Palestine, which like any, we're not Stalin here, right? It's not it's not just a statistic. Like all of this stuff is tragic, but where they go with it, you know, and how much you can impact and change that is something difficult. I've actually seen a lot of people on the left, because it does seem to be that the alliances are fracturing. And they're kind of sick of Biden. It seems to be a point of fracture. People have been saying that this issue is a litmus test, and they might be making long-term decisions based off of that. Now, who knows? If Trump wins again, maybe they change their mind and they're like, "No, we need to realign again before fascism takes over America." But in all of these serious topics, I see you using a lot of humor or trolling a lot, and I wonder what your kind of meta thoughts are on the use of humor in your writing or in politics in general.
I mean, yeah, no, I like to joke. I like to have a good time, and so I don't want like I spend a lot of my time writing on politics and talking about it, and so I don't want to be serious all the time. I want to enjoy myself because I want to enjoy my life. That's why I work on things that I'm interested in. That's why I follow the topics that sort of I'm naturally and intellectually curious about. So I think that humor is fine. I think some people can't deal with it. I think some people don't have the emotional uh, a kind of distance to put between their political or social views and their sense of humor, which maybe they can apply to like their personal life, or maybe they're shy or they're not willing to show that kind of aspect of their personality. While for me, I mean, I'm much freer in that regard. My personality and my personal life and my political views and my work, it's all very integrated. It's all incorporated together. And so the humor is a part of it. Like I could not write and not laugh. I could not do it. Like it would not be me, right? And so there's joy there, and people maybe will think it's sometimes malicious or it's not serious or that it means something like that. Well, it's not. That's not it. I mean, people can read my books and my essays; they could see it's very serious. Even most of my tweets. But yeah, I mean, jokes too. Jokes are fun. Jokes are fun. They add spice to life. We should not we should have a culture that's accepting of them.
100%. And talking about persuading and impacting and influencing people, I think sometimes a really like well thought out, especially story joke, might be more convincing than a
Yeah.
particular
Yeah, I mean, the humor
statistic.
often has a purpose. Like here, it's mocking some kind of thing that people believe that's stupid, or it's laughing at it, or it's sarcastic. Like, I did some humor stuff, like making fun of the Tucker videos. I've seen people do that. I mean, that has a point, right? That's not just making fun of someone for for the sake of getting a laugh. It's also communicating information.
That's right. It has a teleos. It has an aim. As I guess my closing question to you then will be also humorous. Is you're not interested in being fat, and so I'd love to get the Dr. Richard Hanania workout routine. Do you have one, or you just eat well?
I work out. I mean, I go to the gym so twice a week, or twice a week for lifting weights. So I do the chest and tries and shoulders, and then back and biceps. And I try to get legs, but I always run. I always get a few miles in.
Outside of the gym, like not on the treadmill, like you run
Usually
outside.
usually at the gym because I have to
Oh,
drop
okay.
off my kids there. They have childcare at the gym, so
Nice.
I can't get away from the children. That's the only way I can get rid of them. So I do that. Yeah, almost every day. And so yeah, try to get legs and try to get legs are all often hurting because I'm running a lot, but you try to get legs, try to get stomach and like other miscellaneous things, and yeah, otherwise try to limit my calories. And I wrote an article, "Fat Man's Guide to Being Skinny," for people who sort of want the diet advice.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people making their money on X these days doing that. But where can they find all of your wonderful writing? Can you please go ahead and plug that in for
Yeah,
us?
yeah. Go subscribe to my Substack, richardhanania.com. There's free and there's paid. Paid, you get podcasts and you get some extra articles and stuff, but most of the articles are free. So just leave your email. My book, Origins of Woke, check it out. I mean, if you haven't. And then, yeah, follow me on Twitter. You can get my thoughts nonstop, stream of my thoughts on every subject every day of your life. So I'll be there.